Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is CraigCrash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. The NFL Draft is ever so close. It's getting ready to be here, a couple of weeks away. So
Merry Christmas, y'all.
Yes, and so I know in years past we've kind of done one big draft special. Instead, we're going to break it up into two. We're going to talk Colts tonight. So if you don't want to hear about the Colts, we apologize in advance.
Leave.
Yeah, it's fine. We come back next week. We'll talk about the entirety of the NFL Draft. But whether or not you're watching on 3C Media on YouTube, whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, watching us live on Twitch, we welcome you in because it's going to be all things Colts tonight. We're going to get into the weeds here. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a recap of their offseason and then go through our mock drafts. I'm really excited to get into our picks and see who we think because, like, you think about the lack of draft capital, the fact that the Colts don't have necessarily what we're used to seeing them have for the draft, and you kind of think like, oh man, this is going to be rough this year. We don't have a first, and we have a second. I guess we have a second at 42, which is good, and then we have it doesn't we have like two picks before you get into like the hundreds, and then you get into the project guys. Instead, I kind of looking at what's out there, what's available. I think there's some really good value out there for the Colts, in those middle rounds.
Yeah, when I look at this draft, it does sting when you realize that the first round pick was sent to Philadelphia for a quarterback that's no longer on your roster, which we'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But when you actually look at how Chris Ballard has saved face on that from that initial trade into what he's turned it into now, that's impressive. And I got to give him props on that. Yeah, he does like his draft picks. So for him to not have a full arsenal of picks that is ready this year is a little tough, especially considering there's been some holes. But because of the recent moves the Colts have made, it does make the draft a little bit easier on the quick need of some positions that have already been realized. So that does help. But yeah, it is a tough pill to swallow when you realize, oh man, that first round pick was sent to Philadelphia for somebody that's not even on our roster anymore. But hey, it happens. And you're, essentially you turn that first round pick essentially into Matt Ryan.
Yeah. And I think too that this draft, not that Chris Ballard has really anything to like prove necessarily, but like, I think this draft too has like, okay, let's see if that Ballard magic is still there. Let's see.
Well, and it is, if you think about it, how many home run picks has he made that haven't fallen into his lap? I'll say,
right,
in the first round. I mean, I'm not going to count Quentin Nelson because that one, when you're picking it in the top, he traded back, got more picks, and still landed Quentin Nelson. So that was a little magic. I'll say that. But
also
outside of the Quentin Nelson pick in the first round, like really, what if his first round picks have been home runs? I mean, was Paris Campbell a first rounder?
I want to say.
No, he was not. No, he was not. He was a second rounder. So, I mean, Jonathan Taylor, second rounder. Darius Leonard was not a first rounder. I don't remember exactly.
I think it was like
he was like second or third, or he was like a second pick. I think we had two picks in the second round that year, and he was one of our second round picks. And then, Jonathan Taylor was a second round pick. So really the fact that the Colts don't have a first round pick is probably a good thing because he doesn't have a great track record of picking in the first round. I mean, most of his first round picks traded one away for DeForest Buckner, traded one away for Carson Wentz, essentially traded one away from Carson Wentz. That didn't work out, but DeForest Buckner is a great return. But his second round, that's where he really starts to shine. I think second and third round. I think when you look at what you got to grade Chris Ballard on for this draft, it's the later rounds. It's day 3, really, because we know Chris Ballard can hit home runs in the second and third round. But how is he going to do this year in the 5th and the 6th and the 7th? I mean, some of those picks in the past are still, the verdict's still out on them, but, and we're not, I'll go ahead and say it. We'll preface this by saying we're not expecting those guys to come in and be day one starters or be big time contributors. Some of them can be, like those 4th, 5th round guys. 6th and 7th round guys, no, they're not going to be big time contributors whatsoever. They're probably going to be practice squad guys or major depth pieces or special teams players.
Projects.
But yeah, they're going to be projects. But you need to see some sort of development out of those guys. I'm even going to say these past late round picks, but we all know what he can do in the 2nd and 3rd round.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the offseason, what we saw from this Colts team, during the winter months here, early 2022. They first of all named Gus Bradley as the new defensive coordinator. Why that's important is because this team, with an already solid defense, loaded up, which is really nice to see. They first of all traded cornerback Rocky Ya-Sin to the Las Vegas Raiders for defensive end Yannick Ngakoue from the Raiders, who played under Gus Bradley, which is nice to see. On Friday, the Colts acquired cornerback Stephon Gilmore. They re-signed Tyquan Lewis. They re-signed Marvell Tell, corner. They signed corner Brandon Faison. And they
who also played for Gus Bradley last year too. Played for the Raiders.
I thought Faison was from the Chargers.
He was with the Raiders last year. He was. There was a
the picture that I saw on.
He was with the Chargers at one point, but last year he was with the Raiders last year, so he was under Bradley last year.
I gotcha. They also extended linebacker Zaire Franklin. They then traded quarterback Carson Wentz to the Commanders. They traded, of course, for quarterback Matt Ryan. We've discussed that before. They signed tight end Mo Alley Cox to a 3-year extension, and then they also signed offensive tackle Matt Pryor. So,
you forgot Rodney McLeod.
They also bring
safety Rodney McLeod from the Philadelphia Eagles. That one is going to be one of the more underrated signings this offseason for that Colts team. He's a veteran presence in that secondary in with the safeties. Don't be surprised that was a group. They lost George Odom. You got to remember that. And they did not have much depth. So to be able to bring in a vet like Rodney McLeod, who, he's a solid player. Don't expect him to be, we just signed a Pro Bowler. No, we're not. That's not him. But he's going to be one of those guys, kind of like, remember when the Colts signed Mike Adams and he just kind of like out of nowhere just blew up a couple years back? That's how I envision Rodney McLeod being.
Yeah, I was like, I'll admit I didn't know a whole lot about him, so we'll see what.
Because it was reported by Adam Schefter that the Colts were in contract talks with Rodney McLeod. They just hadn't come. The final agreement hadn't been set upon, but they were coming to terms. And then it was like, oh no, but he hasn't officially been signed. There was all this back and forth. Like, Adam Schefter's had a really bad offseason, let's just be honest. Yeah. And then it was like a couple weeks, almost like a week or two later, that the Colts finally officially announced, we've signed Rodney McLeod. And it was just kind of like random 7 a.m. that this tweet came out, and it was like nobody was talking about it anymore because everybody was already talking about it like 2 weeks prior, and nothing became official. And once it did, they finally, and ever since then, any signing that they make or any move they make now, he's always commenting on it or replying or quote retweeting, things like that. So he's going to be a good leader in that room. Yeah. So I'm going to call it now. He's going to be he's going to be the biggest value under the radar signing.
I'm here for it. And let's go ahead and keep with that defensive theme here. So kind of the big question, we've the defense improving over the last 2 years under Reich, under Eberflus, has been, kind of the big points of pride for Colts fans. We've talked about the fact that, hey, over the last, couple of years, though, as of late, that defense has kind of regressed a little bit. I guess over the past year, because 2 years ago they were pretty good. I
can't say they regret.
They weren't what they were the previous season, though.
Last year they led the league in takeaways. This is a ball hawk of a defense.
Right. But I mean,
if they're not taking the ball away, they were giving up points.
Right. Exactly. If they weren't creating turnovers, they were giving up 7. But I mean, as far as like statistically, they were not like, as far as yards allowed, points allowed, that kind of thing. Like, yes, they were able to take the ball away a lot, which was nice because they were up there with like the Buffalo Bills, and you saw how well they did this past season.
We saw what we did to the Buffalo Bills.
Exactly. So the question is, as far as statistically goes, will the Colts have a top 10 defense in 2022? You look at Gus Bradley. He was named the Jacksonville head coach in 2013. In 2012, that Jags defense was 30th in yards allowed and points allowed. In 2013, his first year as the head coach, they improved slightly, at least, to 28th.
Jacksonville.
To 28th in both of those categories. But hey, an improvement's an improvement. He became the Chargers defensive coordinator in 2017. In 2016, a year before he got there, the Chargers were 16th in yards allowed and 29th in points allowed. And then in 2017, his first year at the helm, the Chargers were 15th in yards allowed and 3rd in points allowed. So a huge swing as far as going from being one of the worst teams in the league, as far as allowing the most points, to allowing some of the fewer points that earned him an extension. Then in 2021, Gus Bradley took over as the defensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. The year prior to him getting there, they were 25th in yards allowed, 30th in points allowed. Last year, the Raiders were 14th in yards allowed and 26th in points allowed. So, I think the Colts are, the best defense by far that Gus Bradley has taken over. It was a defense that was already good. It's not like Eberflus didn't leave because the defense was bad. He left just to go take another head coaching job.
Because the defense was pretty good.
Exactly. So, so Gus Bradley's inheriting a very good defense already. Every defense that Bradley has taken over has taken a leap forward in that first year, which is nice to see. And this was a defense that 2 seasons ago was a top 10 defense, and they have some of the same pieces. And then they also add Yannick Ngakoue and Stephon Gilmore. So adding those pieces to an already solid defense and a guy who is known for taking those leaps and jumps forward, I think this is a pretty easy yes. I think this will be a top 10 defense next year.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely going to be a top 10 defense. They were already knocking on the door. They were there in points allowed, and they were knocking on the door in yards allowed. Look, the style of defense that Gus Bradley employs is a much more aggressive style, and it's exactly what fans want to see, and it's going to help. It's going to fit a lot of these players. I do like the fact that the Colts were able to bring in players through free agency that fit the mold of a Gus Bradley defense. Yeah, I know it's like, but they traded Rock Ya-Sin, who was, showing really good signs of growth. Well, you got to realize Rock Ya-Sin didn't really fit. He was becoming a good player, but he didn't fit what Gus Bradley's defense requires out of its corners. So being able to turn Rock Ya-Sin into Yannick Ngakoue, which was a huge area of need for the Colts in pass rush, that's a big major plus. And then you bring in veteran presence in Stephon Gilmore and Rodney McLeod in the secondary. And then you also pair Stephon Gilmore with Kenny Moore and DeForest Buckner and Yannick Ngakoue and Darius Leonard and Julian Blackman and Kari Willis. This defense is stacked. The biggest thing for this defense, especially in the secondary, is health, because the depth still isn't quite there in the secondary. Now, this week, the Colts did, after they signed Stephon Gilmore, they did sign a couple more just small pieces that are depth pieces. They signed former Patriots cornerback Brandon King, who you can't really call him a cornerback because he's barely played that position. He's more in line with a special teams guru. He's a special teamer, but at the same time, he is a depth piece. He knows how to play the position. He's played minimal snaps at that position. But players like that are going to be what you're going to see. But yes, this defense has the ability and has the pieces in play to become a top 10 defense. Health will be an issue. And that's always going to be an issue with any team. When your starters are star heavy, it's going to be an issue. but
Looking,
hey, it is what it is.
Looking at some of the guys that were brought in for this defense, I mean, you've got, like we said, Yannick Ngakoue. He's good for 9 sacks a year. That's what he averages around that category. 9 sacks would have led.
And that's not with a player like DeForest Buckner on the line as well, who's going to take some attention.
True, and
Kwity Paye on the other side.
True, and 9 sacks would have led the team last year for the Colts. 10 sacks last season in Gus Bradley's system, was a Pro Bowler in 2017. Then Stephon Gilmore, 5-time Pro Bowler, all 5 of those Pro Bowls coming the last 6 seasons. 2-time All Pro. I put All Prom in my in my outline. I'm sure he was a heck of a prom date too.
Yeah.
He won the Super Bowl with New England. He was the 2019 AP Defensive Player of the Year. So these are grade A talents that the Colts now add to an already big talent pool.
Just realize though, Stephon Gilmore is 31. He's not the same. He has had some injury this past season. He's not exactly the same player as the 2019 AP Defensive Player of the Year, but he still knows how to play at that level. Just physically, can he play at that level? That's the big question. But if you know how to play up to that level, then you know how to help get your teammates up to that level. And that's what the big factor is going to be.
Yeah, I'm sure, and plus I'm sure he feels kind of slept on after a year in Carolina where he was kind of off the radar. So
and look, Carolina was a dumpster fire, so
yeah.
He may have gotten a doctor to sign off and said he had a quad injury.
So
I know I would have.
So let's go ahead and tie a bow on this entire offseason, and give him a grade before we head into the draft.
I can't tie a bow on it because there's still a lot of moves to be made post draft. I'll begin to tie it. How's that sound?
True. We'll tie a bow on the pre-draft offseason.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I can do that.
So for me, the offseason grade as far as so far. Their offseason. We talked about Gus Bradley, as defensive coordinator. We just mentioned Ngakoue and Gilmore. I'm going to give him a B for those moves, making this good defense even better. But I'm going to say still, though, the offense is still worrisome for me. The target, there's not a whole lot of targets for Matt Ryan. He's got Michael Pittman, who last year had a fantastic season, 88 catches, 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor and Mo Alley Cox are the only returning players who finished in the top 5 for the Colts in receiving last year. And then, excluding Pittman and the running backs, because, we know Jonathan Taylor can catch the ball in the backfield. Nyheim Hines is good about catching the ball out of the backfield.
Speaking of which, did you see that Nyheim Hines are actually going to look at utilizing him this year the way I said they should have last year? As a slot receiver,
took him
long enough.
You see guys kind of playing that hybrid position. The Deebo Samuels of the world, the Cordarrelle Pattersons of the world.
Look what Matt Ryan did with Cordell Patterson.
Yeah, true.
He made him a Pro Bowl-esque wide receiver. I think, and Nyheim Hines, in my opinion, is a better athlete. I'm excited for that move.
Right.
I'm very excited for that move. You have to get your best players on the field, no matter what. You have to figure that out. And Nyheim Hines is one of their better players.
But yeah,
I'll get off that soapbox.
No, you're good. But excluding Pittman and the running backs, the Colts have had 63 catches, 809 yards, and 8 touchdowns returning in 2022. For perspective, Cowboys tight end Dalton Schultz, who finished 41st in receiving last season, had 78 catches, 808 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 2021. So one tight end who didn't crack the top 40 in receiving accounted for the same amount of production as the rest of the receivers the Colts have coming back, besides Pittman, Hines, and Jonathan Taylor. Yes.
Forget about Ashton Doolin.
Right. Pittman was the only Colt with more than 400 yards receiving last season. Matty Ice's Falcons had 4 players, that had more than 400 yards receiving. This is a team that only had 2 fewer wins than the Colts last year. Sure, the Falcons' leading rusher Cordarrelle Patterson had a third of the yardage Jonathan Taylor did last season. But just for the record, we've seen 2 1,800-yard seasons the last 2 years with JT and King Henry. But before that, you'd have to go back to 2014 when DeMarco Murray did it. So expecting the same production out of Jonathan Taylor is a pretty tall hill for him to climb. He's gonna be good. Like, he's going to have another good season. It's just kind of impossible to think like he's going to put up 1,800 yards again. So you're talking about, not having a ton of talent at the receiver position, not having a lot of targets for Matt Ryan. And, oh, by the way, your running back, who had a pretty good case to be Offensive Player of the Year MVP, is most likely going to not be as productive technically than he was a year ago. So, that's all to say that Matt Ryan just needs weapons, and they just aren't there for the Colts as it stands right now. So, I mean, it would have been, I don't know, I guess, what they could have done with the cap space as far as like what would have made it an A for me, but just they didn't do a lot with the receiver position, and I would have liked to have seen that done, and so that's why they get a B for me.
Yeah, I can see that. I will say this is a very, very deep draft for wide receiver, very deep, and don't be surprised if they get a veteran or two post draft. There's a lot of unsigned guys out there that have some question marks just from like that maybe they're injured right now. And those are the players Chris Ballard will go after and get them at a bargain price.
But the thing for me though, like what kind of talent level are we talking about? Because
Julio Jones, Odell Beckham Jr.
How's that gonna?
Because those are just two wide receivers, and on the offensive line, Dwayne Brown. I mean, there's options out there, but at this point right now, you're not going to see any flashy free agent signings because the draft is 2 weeks away.
Right.
And it's, you go through that. And then once the draft is done, and guess what? Teams will start cutting other veterans as well to make room for these rookies that they're bringing in.
Well, the reason why I asked that though is because when I was looking at, they had 21 million of cap space before the Gilmore signing, and Gilmore signed for 2 years, 23, but 2 years, 14 billion.
2 years, 21 mil, 14 guaranteed.
Right. So that's at least 7 million on the book. So that takes them down to 14 million of cap space. And a lot of those guys like Julio Jones and OBJ, who I'd like to have one of those guys, are like commanding that amount like on their own, which would round out the rest of the Colts, the cap space, which means you wouldn't have any money left over to sign draft picks.
But as we get closer to training camps and everything, those types of players are going to get antsy and are gonna sign. They're not gonna land. Like OBJ coming off, he just injured his knee. He's not gonna be back really till about October. So he technically can't command that 14 million a year. He's going to bring his price down, and it's a wait and see right now based on draft and what people do there. And you also got to realize some of the cap space that the Colts have remaining has to be allocated towards their draft picks as well. So that is part, you got to look that in there. So the Colts probably have a little less than 10 million right now. Yeah. So there will be signings, and they will look big. They could look big within name post draft, but these are also older players. So we'll see. All right. For me, pre-draft offseason, I actually give it an A-. Yeah, I know they didn't answer the questions at wide receiver, and left tackle is still really up in the air. I don't think it's really Matt Pryor's job. There are holes, but then I look at what's coming up in the draft and I go, okay, I can see a plan in place here. It was really about building this defense and making it as best as it could be, because really this is a really deep draft offensively. Not too much defensively. There are good defensive players, don't get me wrong. There are, but it's not as deep as it is on the offensive side of things. So A-, not really just because of the players they brought in, because they made some good additions to this team, but because of the way Chris Ballard was able to bring in some of these players and move other players away. So look, bringing in Yannick Ngakoue, great move, trading away Rock Ya-Sin, and then upgrading him to Stephon Gilmore. That's a net positive. That's a net gain right there as far as talent-wise goes and fit for this team, and it fills two big needs. So that's a positive. Quarterback was a big issue. Carson Wentz was just not cutting it. We all knew that. Obviously, everybody's dream scenario would have been Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, and the price tag for Russell Wilson was way too high for Chris Ballard. And really, honestly, when you look at it, I would not have been comfortable making that trade either. I'm not giving up that much future draft capital. So, but then to be able to say, okay, well, we are trading Carson Wentz, and we're going to put ourselves in a position where we need a quarterback. And to be able to go to Washington and play it up like, look, we got a market for him, and then convince Washington to trade you 2/3 with a conditional third that could be a second, depending on the usage of Carson Wentz this next season. Oh, and by the way, you are also going to take on his contract, so we don't have any dead cap space, any dead hits. That masterful work. But not only that, he took one of the the Colts then had 2 third-rounders for this year, their own, and they had Washington's. They took one of those, I think it ended up being our 3rd-round pick, took our 3rd-round pick, sent it to Atlanta for Matt Ryan, and he said, and they got him, convinced them to hold on to his dead cap. I mean, it's those things like, oh, but he didn't sign a big, like, future quarterback of the future. No, but he saved the future for this team with these moves that people don't talk about. People just look at the name and the position and what we gave up, but you're not realizing that by convincing Atlanta to eat his salary, his dead cap space and all of that, oh my gosh, it freed up so much more cap space for the Colts. It allowed them then they also restructured his contract, so it was a little bit more back heavy for next year to incentivize him staying around for a second year, unlike Phillip Rivers. And then all these moves, these financial moves of convincing teams to eat salary that the Colts didn't want to pay, allowed them then to be able to sign Stephon Gilmore. So I'm giving it an A- because of those moves that allowed for other potential moves and did not kill the future for this franchise in cap space or draft picks. And just the masterful work that he was able to do to convince these teams to play ball. I mean, and then it all came out that there was zero market for Carson Wentz, and the Colts were most likely going to have to cut him by the date that they traded him to Washington. I mean, fleeced the Commanders, just fleeced them. So you have to give credit where credit is due and give it props, because that was some masterful work right there. Those are the I forget the name of the YouTube show that the Colts put together every offseason, and you can kind of see that in play a little bit with Chris Ballard when you watch that series. So yeah, A- for me, not because of the players we brought in, partially because of the players we brought in, but mostly because of the moves that allowed the Colts to still make future moves.
Yeah, I mean, when you lay it all out like that, it is pretty impressive what Chris Ballard was able to do. Like, hey, yeah, there's totally people out here that want Carson Wentz. You're gonna want us to, basically do what we did to the Eagles last year.
You need Carson Wentz. You need him.
You need him,
and you need him so bad. You're gonna take his astronomical salary too, and you're gonna give us 2/3 with the second of the thirds being conditional for how much you use them, which you're going to use them. Trust me. So that third's going to turn into a second.
Although watch, this year is going to be the year that he gets hurt in the second game. And not that I'm wishing injury on him at all, but I'm just saying that'll be how it works out.
That's the luck of Indiana.
Yeah, true.
Pacers trade away Karis LeVert for a conditional first-round pick to the Cavs. And guess what? They don't get the pick.
Sounds about right.
That's just the way it works in Indy.
Well, before we move on to the mock draft, let's go ahead and hear from our friends of the show. First of all, from Anchor. The Crash Course podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place. Also, the Crash Course podcast is brought to you by Eat Lunch and Board Game. That is a podcast about how board games can help you bridge some relationships, whether it be at home or on the job site at work. So make sure you check that out. It's also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. It's another Anchor podcast that is done. So go check that out as well. Board games build bridges. And remember, you can follow us, 3C Media, on Facebook. You can go follow us on Twitter as well, at 3C Media Sports. Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, ring the bell if you're not already there. If you are there, do it now, please. Come on, what are you doing? So make sure you're checked in there for some content, standalone content from just the podcast itself. Also 3C Media on TikTok as well. I've got some ideas for the month of May that will be pretty cool, so make sure you're locked in there. Remember that we record live every Tuesday, twitch.tv/CraigCrash, so go check us out over there if you want to give us your thoughts and comments. And then remember that you can hear us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard, you can hear the Crash Course podcast. So let's go ahead and look into the mock draft here. So looking at the picks that the Colts have. They will pick. They do not have a first round pick. So that first night when everyone's getting all excited and all that stuff. Just go ahead and just go to bed early that night if you're a Colts fan, because the Colts will not be making a selection that night. But
I wouldn't.
I mean, you have insight on them sneaking back into the first round. You think they would?
You just never know. You never know.
That's true. So in the second round, the Colts have pick number 42. In the third round, the Colts have pick 73. In the fourth round, the Colts have pick 122. 2 picks in the fifth round, pick 159 and pick 179. And in the sixth round, the Colts have pick 216, and will round out their draft in the seventh round, pick 239. Looking at their needs, I looked at a Sports Illustrated article from April 1st, and they have quarterback as the first need for the Colts, and technically, but also I will not be happy if that's the Colts' first pick in the draft. I will. I mean, I guess depending on who it is, but still, that doesn't feel like that should be their most primary need, at least not for this season. So the remaining order over there was wide receiver, left tackle, corner, although that was before the Stephon Gilmore signing, so that makes it not as pressing. Tight end and wide receiver again. So bottom line, protection and weapons is what the needs are for the Indianapolis Colts going into the draft. So I'll go ahead and give my picks. We're going to go ahead and show that on the screen here. It's... We'll put this in the middle here, some on-the-fly editing and stuff like that. So here are the draft picks that I had. Starting off second round, pick 42. So I did my draft on the Pro Football Network website, and the great thing about that is that, I typically don't do trades. I typically stay away from it when it comes to this, type of thing, just because, it's just so hard to predict, how trades will work. But one came across the board with the Cleveland Browns. Shocker, the Colts always love to trade with the Cleveland Browns. That I was like, this feels very Chris Ballard-esque. I channeled my inner Chris Ballard with this one. It looked like one, like I said, that was pretty good. So it was trading the 42nd and 159th pick to Cleveland for the 44th pick and the 99th pick. So they trade 2 spots back in the second round, but get a higher third round pick for that extra fifth rounder or fourth rounder. I can't remember which one that was. So with the 44th pick, I went with a player the Colts have actually met with, over the past week or so, and that is Cincinnati wide receiver Alec Pierce. With the Bearcats last season, he had 884 yards, 8 touchdowns on 52 catches. His player comp, according to Walter Football, is Jordy Nelson. NFL.com compares him to Donovan Peoples-Jones. So a little bit of a spectrum of all over the place with that one. You've got Jordy Nelson or Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I think, looking at his pros from NFL.com, I mean, he's big, strong, has toughness to work at the middle of the field. He finds holes in the defense really well. The cons he's described as having are not quick on his release, and he can, he does have a tendency to telegraph his routes, which, I mean, those are things that, like, coaching will likely clean that up, like good coaching, and I think the Colts have that. So it's not something that just completely turns you off to, okay, he's got a lot of issues, we got to get away from him. So the Colts need weapons for Matt Ryan, and there are far more positives for Pierce than negatives for me. So I've got the Colts going wide receiver first round and taking Alec Pierce. Go ahead, do you have any thoughts on that?
Nope.
So with the third round pick at pick 73, I thought it was really kind of crazy that the Colts, or that this player was still available. So I kind of went ahead and went with it because he's projected as a first or second round talent, and I was able to get him in the third round with pick 73. And that is Ohio State offensive tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere. He's... I mean, I was very surprised he was still there, so it was a steal for me. I had to go with him. He played right tackle in 2020 for the Buckeyes and left tackle in 2021, so, I mean, versatile, which is nice to see. NFL.com describes him as an above-average athlete. He has solid lateral quickness and is very efficient. His player comp is Austin Jackson, who was a first rounder out of USC in 2020. And then he's described as needing work, but he's on the same side of the line as Quentin Nelson, so he'll be able to kind of learn. I know obviously Quentin plays guard, not tackle, but he's going to have that veteran presence next to him. He's going to have that mentor on that side of the line. So I think any issues that he may come with will be cleaned up with relative ease. And I think he can be molded into that left tackle of the future. So if you're able to get a guy like that in the third round, I think you go ahead and you pull the trigger. My other third round pick, the one that I traded for, pick 99, I used that to tab Kentucky wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson. He's a product, like I said, product of the earlier trade. So I went with another weapon for Matt Ryan. I thought it was a good idea to capitalize on that. He had 113 catches for over 1,300 yards and 7 touchdowns in 2021. Walter Football described him as a better Brandon Cooks, similar to Tyreek Hill, though not as fast, although that's one of the big allures of Tyreek Hill. So Tyreek Hill, but not fast, is not a great comparison, but still.
Look, if you want a comparison, I know all about Wan'Dale Robinson. His comparison is Rondale Moore. And I say this because he almost came to Purdue, and they were going to utilize him the same as Rondale Moore, but he was going to be there the same time as Rondale Moore.
I gotcha.
And didn't want to compete with Rondale on the field for PT. So his comparison is Rondale Moore, and they're both from the same area.
Well,
close to the same area.
Speaking of Rondale Moore, one thing that kind of ticked me off about this pick, not because I didn't want to pick Wan'Dale, but because I was like, I debated. I was like, okay, do I take, because David Bell was still on the board at pick 77. I would have taken David Bell. Right. Over Wan'Dale, just because there's so many question marks surrounding Wan'Dale that really he's got 1 year of being a true receiver under his belt at Kentucky, whereas when he was at Nebraska, they utilized him mostly in the backfield. So I was picking and I was going to take all fandom aside, I would go David Bell for the Colts. One, he's a local product, so that helps with, interest. And two, his hands. He wins the 50-50 ball. He's not super fast. He runs crisp routes. He's got good hands, and he's a physical wide receiver. He just knows how to make plays.
Whereas Wandale has a lot of, there was times in his career at Nebraska. I don't know too much about his time at Kentucky, but I know at Nebraska, he would just disappear. And it didn't with David Bell. Every single week, David Bell, unless he wasn't playing, performed. It didn't matter. Everybody knew he was going to get his targets. They all tried to stop him from getting his targets, and they couldn't. I mean, ask Iowa. I mean, that's why I would have gone with David Bell there, just because a sure-handed wide receiver who just knows how to make the plays.
What I was getting to, though, is the fact that I with that first pick in the third round, I was debating whether or not I wanted to go David Bell or with Petit Ferrer, and I was like, well, we got to get that left tackle here.
Yeah.
And so I was hoping he would fall to me, and like at 78 or 79, the Cardinals took yeah, I was like, that's why I thought it was funny, because I was like, really? Now you've got David Bell and Rondell? Okay, I guess you're gonna draft,
I guess we're finally gonna get to see what every Purdue fan wanted to see. What can the two of them do on the field together?
Right, exactly. So I was like, cool, man. I'm glad Arizona's just taking all the Purdue receivers here. So, but yeah, that was I was hoping he would fall back to me. It felt a lot like a fantasy football draft where I was like, oh, he'll be there for me in the next round, and then he wasn't. I was very sad. But yeah, I mean, as far as Wandale goes, I mean, Walter Football describes him as a better Brandon Cook, similar to Tyreek Hill, but not as fast. NFL.com compares him to Deebo Samuel, which is a good comparison. NFL.com says he can make plays in a variety of different alignments. He's described as a gadget receiver, but can be a dump and run target as well. So, I mean, a very versatile, playmaking type guy. Very, I think, like I said, kind of like with the other picks, I think anything that's wrong with him could be cleaned up with coaching, and I think he can be a good player for the Indianapolis Colts. In the fourth round, pick 122, I went with Baylor safety JT Woods. NFL.com, his pros are that he ran track, which means he's got sprinter speed. He played all safety assignments at Baylor. He had 9 interceptions the past 2 seasons with the Bears, so that's pretty cool. I mean, think about how often that Big 12 offenses are throwing the football, and he was able to go out there and just be a ball hawk. His cons are that he's got too much freestyle in his movements and his coverage, but he can be a rangy playmaker. In reading his evaluations, and I know this is kind of an off-the-wall type comparison and kind of a lot of expectations to put on this kid, if that was the way you'd go with him, but it kind of reminded me of like Ed Reed in the sense of like being a kind of guy who can, you throw to a guy you think is wide open, and then here comes, Ed Reed out of the blue. He's going to come and intercept the ball. That's what it made me think of when I was hearing all of his, like, the description of how he plays. And, like, obviously, I mean,
that's a lofty expectation.
Exactly. But at the same time, like, if he can be half of that type of player and make some of those types of plays, like, it's a good pick at that value. So that's what I was, like I said, I nowhere expect him to be close to Ed Reed, but at the same time, if he can make similar plays and be that a similar type player, that would be really incredible. In the 5th round, pick 179, I went with Texas A&M tight end Jalen Weidermeyer. He had 40 catches, 515 yards, and 4 touchdowns for the Aggies last season. He's 6'5", 255, so he's a big dude, which is a big reason why I went with him, just as another, weapon for Matt Ryan. According to NFL.com, he's got solid acceleration and can create separation with ease. His height is a big advantage. He's also described as being a liability when it comes to blocking, but, I mean, you're the 3rd tight end on the roster, so you got other guys who can do that. I mean, as long as he's passable, so like whenever he comes in, the defense is like, well, this is obviously a passing play because Weidermeyer's in. As long as it doesn't turn into something like that, like I think it can be okay. Pick 216 in the 6th round. At this point, this is when I'm just going for kind of depth. And that kind of thing. I went with Memphis offensive guard Dylan Parham. He's a depth pick for the offensive line. He can play either guard, slot, and he has great balance of blocking technique. A scout describes him as smart and isn't concerned about matchups, which is good considering his size. And so it seems like a no-brainer late in the draft. You got a guy who's versatile and just kind of steady and solid. And then with the 239th pick in the 7th round, I went with UTSA linebacker, University of Texas San Antonio linebacker Clarence Hicks. He can be used on the edge as well, so he kind of takes care of a couple of needs as far as depth at the linebacker position, as well as an edge rusher, which I feel like is always on the team needs for the Colts, like every single year. And it's like I feel like we drafted an edge guy every single year or get somebody. So it's like, come on,
because Ballard loves the trenches.
That's true. He did have 16 and a half tackles for losses, 10 and a half sacks, and interception for the Roadrunners last season. He was first team All-Conference USA in 2021, and Pro Football Network describes him as fast. He disrupts. He's disruptive. He breaks up plays efficiently. His size is an issue, but again, when you're at the end of the draft, you're just kind of drafting projects anyway. So why not get some depth? Why not get a guy who can be, versatile, can be used well? Because that's kind of what Chris Bauer looks for, those guys that can be used in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, especially the later, it's guys, how are you going to be? Can you perform on special teams? Can you be depth? Can you be good practice squad depth? Those types of things. All right, my draft. So I did mine through PFF.com mock draft simulator. It's the one I've always used. And it does not offer you trades. You're allowed to initiate trades, but trades aren't offered to you. So yours was interesting that they actually presented trades to you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did like that feature because I've always been hesitant because
I don't know.
Yeah,
when it comes to the trade type stuff, honestly, I don't know what kind of value they put on different picks.
Right.
So when things are offered, that's pretty cool. So I did not make any trades. So for me, round 2, pick 42, I went with Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. Look, any other year when George Pickens isn't coming off of an injury, George Pickens is a first-round pick, potentially top 15 pick, maybe first wide receiver off the board. There's a couple wide receivers like that in this draft that are potential first-round guys, but some injuries here this season have derailed them. The other one being Alabama wide receiver John Mechie. So George Pickens, though, is a big wide receiver. He's got some speed. He fits it fits everything you want in a wide receiver. And he did battle back and play really well in the national championship game for Georgia. So I went with George Pickens there. Round 3, pick 73. So PFF actually has him listed as the wrong position. I went with Jamari Sailor or Sailor. He's actually PFF has him listed as a tackle out of Georgia. He's actually a guard. So I went with Jamari Sailor thinking he was a tackle, but when you look at my draft as it goes on, I can be okay with taking a 6'4", 330-pound guard because look, right guard is a need. It is definitely a need on this offensive line. He's a big guy. That Georgia offensive line was really good. So I'm okay with that pick, even though he's a guard and not a tackle. Round 4, pick 122. I went with tight end Grant Calcaterra out of SMU. Yes.
Second straight year. I was going to say second straight year.
Second straight year of taking the tight end from SMU, which, bodes well. Now, I did not get a very good grade for it. I got a C+ on it, which is interesting.
You said, heck you, Pro Football.
Well, I did because you know what? This is actually a player that the Colts are legitimately connected to. People have actually, this has been this has been a very tough year of trying to figure out how the Colts will draft. In years past, it was kind of like, okay, there isn't a whole lot of needs for this team. So you can dial in on certain positions and certain players fairly easy. This year, it is not. And the players that they're bringing in are just all over the board. Just all over the board. Like who? What? Linebacker? What? Why? And the number of quarterbacks that have been brought in, it's just like, you have no idea where the Colts are going. Like last year, it was easy. We knew Michael Pittman was going to be the first player off the board in the second round for this Colts team. Michael Pittman. And sure enough, Michael Pittman. I mean, it was like a no-brainer. But this draft is so, I don't know, it just feels real wonky, and it's shifted around so much, especially considering the Colts don't have a first-round pick. It's so hard to nail down because you never know who's going to fall from the first into the second. There's going to be that player, and it's really hard. But Grant Calcaterra, he's one of the few players that has actually legitimately been connected to the Colts at an area of need for the Colts. All right, round 5, pick 159. I go with cornerback Cordell Flott out of LSU. I got an A+.
I was going to say, got an A+ for that one.
But he is a slot. He is like a nickel slot corner, which is Kenny Moore. But at this point, because you brought in Stephon Gilmore, you're not looking for a starting cornerback. You're looking for depth pieces. Cordell Flott is would be a really good depth piece. And if you needed him to slide in the event of an injury to a starter, you could be okay with that. You're comfortable with it. Round 5, pick 179. This is the pick I'm most happy about, to be honest. Cordell Volson, tackle out of North Dakota State. I don't know. Did I mention this to you off air or was it on air?
It was off air. It was right before we got going.
Off air.
Yeah.
This North Dakota State offensive line was the real deal this past year. Legitimately could be considered one of the best offensive lines in all of college football, not just the FCS level. This is an offensive line that road graded their team to a national championship this past season against a very good Montana State defense. They helped pave the way for over 300 yards rushing in the national championship game.
That's a lot of yards.
Unreal. It was. I think it ended up being like 320. I mean, they just could not break through this offensive line. Montana State has a linebacker that will get his name called between maybe potentially third round. I don't know. I wouldn't mind if the Colts went after him. So I really like this pick. I think this is going to be this. If he falls to the Colts and the Colts end up getting him, and I only got a B+ for it, but I feel like it's a little undervalued. And I feel like this is a pick. This is a guy that could potentially end up being a starting left tackle for the Colts. So I'm excited about that pick. Now we get into the 6th and 7th rounds. It's such a crapshoot when you get to these rounds because you just don't know. You just don't. So I still looked at some positions of need where they need depth, and also kind of where Chris Ballard likes to go typically. So I did go. He likes the trenches, I know, and we haven't addressed the defensive trenches in this draft. So I went with Marquand McCall, D lineman out of Kentucky. I got an A+ pick for it, an A+ grade on this pick. So I don't really know too much about him. He is a bigger guy, and so I think he would be it's one of those guys, a good project, good fit, good depth piece. And then, they did trade over this past year. So we go into round 7, pick 240. They did trade away, or they didn't trade away. They let him walk in free agency, but Marlon Mack. So there's not a whole lot of depth at running back right now, especially considering if they do end up going with Nyheim Hines in the slot more, utilizing him more in that role. So you do need some depth at running back. I did look at taking running back maybe in the 6th round or even up a little bit higher. I don't feel like this is a great draft for running back. So I went with, based on the draft and the rankings and everything, TJ Pledger out of Utah. He was high for where I was picking at 240. He was slotted in around 180. So I felt like it was a good value at that point. And depending on his athleticism and everything, he can be a depth piece. He can also play some special teams, things like that. Somebody that you could potentially look at as a return man, because you now have Isaiah Rodgers, who is your return man. He's doing more. He's going to be a starter most likely now in your secondary. So TJ Pledger, honestly, I don't know anything about him. I'll be straight with you. I don't know anything about him. When you get to that 7th round, you're just like, I don't know. Sure, why not? A running back, it seems like something Chris Ballard would pick. Honestly, he probably will end up picking a linebacker here. He always tends to go with linebacker in the 7th round.
Clarence Hicks. Let's go.
Yeah, I think your pick's more likely than mine. So yeah, I'll probably mess around with this a whole lot more over the next couple weeks just to try to get a better feel. But because there's been times, another guy that's popped up is Travis Deich, a tackle out of Arizona State that has been thrown on a lot of people's boards like this. So that's a potential one. Obviously, John Michie is another. David Bell has popped up on some. Cordell Flott and Cordell Volson have been on several, as well as Grant Calcaterra. This is the first time I've really seen Jamari Saylor, honestly. So pop up on as a potential on any type of board or available. So these mock draft simulators are pretty decent, I think, because they do kind of ebb and flow with how things are falling. So as this week goes on and into next week, I think you may start getting a better feel of what could potentially be there. I mean, you do have to mess around with the settings a little bit, because I think like the generic settings are just go with best player available, and you can slide it. They have it slid to strictly team need, and those types of things. So you have to play with the settings a little bit to kind of adjust it to what you think or how you typically have seen drafts unfold in the past. It's fun.
Yeah,
I'll say that having something like this, it makes it interesting. But if you want to see any type of like what people are potential other fans are thinking, I encourage you to go to, download the Bleacher Report app on your phone, follow the Colts, go down to the community like message board area, and every day there's like 6, 7, 8 fans that will post one of these mock drafts. So if you kind of that kind of helped, that gave me an idea of what other people are thinking as well. And honestly, this year is one of the first years I have not looked at a lot of the experts mock drafts, because they all too many of them just focus on the first round anyway. So you just when the Colts don't have a first round pick, it just doesn't make sense. So I haven't really looked too much into those at this point yet. So it'll be interesting. I'm very excited. I always say this every year. The NFL draft is very much like Christmas. Are you going to get that nice, shiny new red bike that you've been wanting all year? Or are you going to get a pair of socks? You just don't know.
I can't get the bike. I'm too fat. I'm going to break the tires.
You get a trike. An adult tricycle.
Tandem bike. I'm too big. I need a bike for 2 people.
It's going to be a tandem bike where the person in the front has to do all the pedaling.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be like one of those like chair. It's going to be like a chariot or like
a
horse
actually
and buggy.
We're going to get Craig one of those pedal bars.
Yeah.
Where, everybody's doing the pedaling and Craig's sitting on the bitch seat in the back where doing absolutely nothing but drinking a beer.
You could probably also, talking about trying to find out like what other people are thinking. You could probably also go to Reddit for that as well.
That's
true. The Reddit Colts
board.
You
go to Reddit and then you end up like down like 6 other rabbit holes.
Well, you just got to go to r-colts. Don't go anywhere else. Don't click any unsavory links. You might be in somewhere else on Reddit.
I might end up in the conspiracy theory side of things.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do like where our head's at, because I think our drafts were very similar, but had, good balance of like, we both had 2 linemen, we both had some, weapons for the Colts. And I think that's kind of the thing where like, that's what we want to walk away with. At the end of the day, Colts fans, we want to see the Colts walk away with, a couple of wide receivers, a wide receiver and a tight end.
That's where I wish I would have gone with a second wide receiver on there. None of them just appealed to me later on.
Before we go, I do want to also say that, like, because I know you did a mock draft that you shared with me earlier on in the winter, and it had you had us taking Matt Corral, and I took a look at the quarterbacks that were available, like once I got to the 4th and 5th round. And obviously, I mean, there wasn't, obviously not to the level. I mean, it's already a weak quarterback class. So once you got to, like, I contemplated it for a second at in the 5th round drafting like Jack Cohn. And I was like, I don't really.
If you go that route, you're basically saying, hey, Sam Ehlinger, you're not it.
Well, but also like
I don't like that because I think Sam Ehlinger is a very good football player,
and I do too. I think he is more. And if you're going to draft another quarterback like before Matt Ryan leaves, it needs to be a guy that it needs to be a maybe not to the same caliber, but Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence. It needs to be
along the lines of like a Trey Lance,
right,
waiting in the wings in San Francisco, or it needs to be an Aaron Rodgers taking over from Brett Favre type situation.
It needs to be someone.
Aaron Rodgers wasn't a sure thing. I mean, look, the guy fell to like super late in the first round,
24th, I think.
Yeah, so obviously he wasn't a sure thing, and it panned out. But that's kind of the situation the Colts are in. They're needing somebody. So I guess if there is one quarterback I'm looking at that could potentially be there, it is Nevada quarterback Carson Strong. He's got, I mean, it's in his name. He's got a strong arm, but he's a really smart player. He's got good size. He's not super athletic, but sometimes I feel like these super athletic quarterbacks try to do too much and extend plays, and it ends up hurting the team more so than anything because they all end up trying to be like Pat Mahomes, and it's like it doesn't work. So a sound quarterback that can move if he needs to. Carson Strong is a guy. Another guy that I would look at as a potential is Sam Howell. I mean, he didn't have the greatest season this past year, but Sam Howell at one point was looked at as a potential top 10 player. And based on, they just didn't have much around him this past year. And based on what team needs are and the other players that are in this draft, he's fallen. And because of that, teams don't really go after quarterbacks for a certain amount of time because they're either going to try to grab their quarterback of the future in the first round, or there's other positions that they need to fill and they value higher in the second and third rounds. So Sam Howell and Carson Strong are two guys to definitely look at. I know the Colts recently worked out Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati. I don't know if that was because I know actually in this draft that I sent you today, I could have taken Desmond Ridder. He was available. He was sitting there. And I was like, I cannot spend the Colts' first pick on a quarterback. It's not going to help in the right now. So that's why I went with George Pickens. But, Desmond Ridder is there. I know the Colts worked him out. I don't know if it's because they're actually legitimately interested or if it was just you're in Cincinnati, we're in Indianapolis, proximity, we need to come look at you anyways. I know they also looked at Malik Willis out of Liberty. He's not going to be available for the Colts. But
he's one of the guys that's like touted in the first round. So
I feel like the Colts went and talked to him because it was kind of a nod to the fans and the city, because during the combine, Malik Willis made headlines for stopping and essentially giving all of his extra brand new draft Nike clothing to a homeless person sitting on the streets in Indianapolis. So there's a little heartstring tug there for the fan base and working him out. You got to, when somebody makes headlines like that in a good way in your city during the draft process, you got to talk to him.
Yeah.
you have to work him out, even though everybody knows he's not going to be available, unfortunately.
Colts trade all their draft picks to go to number 1 and draft Malik Willis, quarterback.
Oh, he's not going to be number 1, but I don't think he gets past Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
He's got Pittsburgh written all over him, unfortunately. But but those are the two quarterbacks I would look at right now: Carson Strong and Sam Howell.
Yeah, and like the reason why I brought it up too is just kind of seen it as like one of the Colts' needs is a quarterback, and I'd almost rather, like, if you're like, cool, it's fine if you want to bring another quarterback into camp, whatever. I know that right now, as far as if you're legitimately looking at someone other than Sam Ehlinger, they need to be like for sure like the same caliber or like more ready than Ellinger or something like that. I mean, because the Colts need to use this time that they have Matt Ryan wisely, as far as like, okay, you gotta within the next either this draft or next draft, you need to figure out who your quarterback post Matt Ryan is going to be and have him learn under Matt Ryan.
Don't sleep on Sam Ellinger. I'm serious.
No, and I'm not. The point
I'm not even talking. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everybody else.
Yeah.
Because like I this is my soapbox I stand on when it comes to a quarterback. He doesn't need to be the supersized, look like Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning. He needs to know how to win. He needs to know how to manage a game and make the right plays, make smart plays, and that's Sam Ellinger. And honestly, let's be honest, the 6'5" quarterback that stands stoic in the pocket is a thing of the past. Look, two of the better quarterbacks in this past decade were Russell Wilson and Drew Brees. Those are little guys. They're not 6'5" statue of what a quarterback looks like. They're not. And you can win. They've shown that you can win with a quarterback that's not standing above the pockets. And I just don't, I never felt this confidence with Jacob Eason when he was on the roster. I always felt, I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, he bounced around a bunch when he couldn't beat out somebody. And it's like, that doesn't bode well sit well with me for a quarterback. Sam Ellinger had the talent, and Texas was going through a rough patch. He had the talent to go anywhere, but he stuck it out at Texas. He stepped up in big games and led his team to victories. I mean, he willed his team to victories, and that's what you need out of a quarterback. And I feel like Sam Ellinger could very easily be the quarterback of the future for the Colts. So I think with the right mentorship from Matt Ryan, Sam Ellinger can be the guy.
Yeah.
And I really hope he's given a legitimate shot of being the guy.
Yeah, I was not ever really super sold on Eason from the beginning, but basically what I was getting at is it was a long-winded form of saying, like, I'd almost rather see the Colts bring in someone from the USFL, bring in Paxton Lynch, Shea Patterson. If you're bringing in a third quarterback, I would rather them do
a third quarterback.
Yeah, okay. That's what I'm saying. If you're gonna go with bring in another quarterback, for this offseason, let it be one of those guys before you spend one of your very few already draft picks on a quarterback. I'd rather them address all their other needs first, rather than go out there and be like, well, with the third pick, we're going to go ahead and grab somebody, with our third, round pick or second round pick or whatever. I'd rather them just stay the course, get some wide receivers, get some talent that way. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm with you 100%. I like Ellinger. I think he can be the future. I think you need to find your future before Matt Ryan is gone so he can learn about Ryan. But at the same time, I just hope the Colts, I don't think they will, but I've seen their needs, like, according to the experts, be like, well, they need to get a quarterback at some point. It's like, nah, I'd rather just stick with Ellinger and bring maybe a third guy in if that's undrafted or something like that.
And if you really feel strongly about if you don't think Ellinger's the guy, you have a first round pick next year.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and let's say the whole thing falls apart this year.
4-13,
I don't think
baby.
it will. You're gonna you could potentially have a good pick.
Yeah.
So, and I from what I understand, next year's draft class, the quarterback class situation is better. So, I mean, just don't waste one on a quarterback this year. Don't force it. But I don't think that's not Chris Ballard. He's not going to just force it. That's not him at all. He knows what he needs. And right now, I feel like he has faith in Ellinger as the backup right now, and obviously Matt Ryan as a starter.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And they do have a third guy. I just can't remember his name. I feel like he's got a good story behind him too.
Nate Davis.
No, it's not Nate Davis.
I know.
Speaking of former Ball State players.
Winning.
Speaking of former Ball State players, did you know former Ball State defensive end Jonathan Newsom is playing in the USFL?
I did not know that, but what team is he on so I can root for
them?
You know
what? I do not know. I'm sure you could just type it in real quick.
Yeah.
I know he wasn't the guy that got cut because he wanted pizza instead of chicken salad. I know that. I know he's not that guy.
My computer was freaking out earlier when I clicked into the ad read. So let me see if Jonathan Newsome or Newson as I typed it. All right, where are you, Jonathan Newsome? He is the Birmingham Stallions. All right.
Oh, so he's actually the home team.
Yeah, he's one of the few players playing at all their home games at home this season. But that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go follow us on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. Go to the YouTube channel, hit like, subscribe, ring the bell. Go check us out on TikTok, 3C Media. Watch us live every week, twitch.tv/CraigCrash. And remember, you can listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
Next week, we'll be talking about the draft in its entirety, getting into some of the picks that will be made, looking at this draft a little bit more from a NFL perspective rather than just the Colts. So we're going to get into that. It's going to be really exciting. But until then, have a good one, everybody.